Welcome to the deep dive, where we really try to get under the surface of fascinating material. Today, we're tackling something huge, a concept that shapes billions of lives, but maybe it's not always understood the way it was originally intended. We're talking about din. A lot of us probably think, yeah, I know what din means, but what if the Quranic core of it has been kind of skewered over centuries? Our main source today is Professor Mohammed Dozan's work, Quran'ın Dinde Dicini. And it promises to, well, strip away some of those misunderstandings, get back to the original meaning.
That's exactly right. Professor Dozan, he makes this really compelling case that over time, history has led to what he calls a vulgarization of key Quranic terms. They get reduced, he argues, to sort of shells, empty shells, losing their original depth. And that obviously impacts how people understand their whole path. So this deep dive, it's really about trying to grasp what the Quran actually meant by din and challenging that assumption that our current ideas always match up with the divine intent.
Okay, so our mission then is to uncover that pure Quranic understanding of din, explore its different but connected meanings, and maybe see how it stacks up against what the source calls these fabricated dins, the ones that apparently make life harder, more restrictive, instead of freeing. Let's dive in.
Okay, so Professor Dozan starts right at the heart of the problem. He says the idea of din in many people's minds today, it often clashes pretty significantly with Allah's original message in the Quran. He points to things like, cultural baggage, superstitions, human interpretations piling up over time, and they've kind of stripped din of its real identity, its expansive meaning. He even uses the word heartbreaking to describe the gap between the current perception in some places and the original intent.
Wow. So if I'm getting this right, the source is saying din has almost become something else entirely. Like you have this beautiful original vase, but now it's holding something completely different, maybe something less valuable.
Precisely. That's a great analogy. The book really tries to diagnose how these meanings shifted. It shows how the Quran's din, which it describes consistently as easy, liberating, progressive, how that's been replaced by these human-made, fabricated dins, and those are often painted as difficult, scary, even enslaving. And according to Dozan, these fabricated versions, they pull us away from the Quran itself, from using our intellect, and from fitra.
Fitra, right, that innate sense of things.
Exactly, that deep-down human nature that just recognizes truth and simplicity when it sees it.
That's a really powerful starting point. And Professor Dozan goes even deeper, doesn't he? Right into the etymology, the roots of the word din. Seems like the word itself holds a ton of meaning.
Oh, absolutely. Etymologically, din is like, well, it's like a gemstone with many facets. Each one reflects a different part of this whole picture. It covers meanings like measure, reckoning, system, obedience, submission, sanction, debt, even punishment and reward, judgment, rule.
That's quite a list.
It is. And what's fascinating is how they're not really separate ideas. They're all woven together. Din isn't just belief. It's about living by a divine measure, submitting to a system that brings order, and knowing it all leads ultimately to judgment. It's a whole framework for how we exist, guiding actions, intentions.
Okay, now here's something that really jumped out at me from the source. Professor Dozan talks about Yevmudin, the day of din. Usually that means the day of judgment, right? In the hereafter. But he points out that in Surah Al-Fatiha, the very opening of the Quran, verses 2 to 7 specifically, it takes on this extra layer of meaning, something about this world.
Yes, and that's such a crucial distinction for understanding how relevant din is, like right now in our daily lives. In Al-Fatiha, Yevmudin points more specifically to the world day or world time. It means living our present lives according to these defined measures, spiritual, ethical, even legal ones. Knowing that our actions have consequences here and now. So when you think of Yevmudin as this world day, it means every choice you make, every interaction, it all carries weight. It's like a daily accounting measured against that divine standard. So din isn't just about waiting for the hereafter. It's about our conscious measured life today, how we conduct ourselves.
And the source also mentions Surat, the path, as basically a synonym for din, carrying all those implications for faith and how we behave.
Exactly. It's the roadmap. A comprehensive one for navigating both the spiritual journey and our worldly duties.
So through all this complexity, Professor Dozan keeps coming back to one core idea, right? To kind of simplify it all. That din in its purest form is just total submission to Allah.
Indeed. That's the bedrock. Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 130-133, defines din as Prophet Abraham's belief system, pure, sincere submission to Allah alone. And this principle, Tawheed, the absolute oneness of God, it's the backbone. for our ethics, our actions. It gives us this clear, unwavering framework for how we deal with the world, with others, with ourselves.
So it's not just some historical thing then, stuck back in Abraham's time. It's universal.
Not at all, no. The source traces it through all the prophets.
Yeah.
Abraham, Jacob, Ishmael, Isaac, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, peace be upon them all. They were all entrusted with the same fundamental system: belief, action, ethics, which is essentially Islam in its broadest meaning. That state of peaceful submission.
Okay.
It's the original blueprint, you could say. And it brings this sense of inner freedom, actually, moral clarity, because your ultimate loyalty isn't divided. For you listening, this means things like consistency in your character, a clear ethical compass, knowing you belong to this long universal spiritual line. It simplifies everything because there's one single focus point.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so if this pure submission, this tawhid, is the core of din, then the next obvious question is, well, who gets to define how we submit? Where's the authority?
Exactly. And the Quran is very clear on this. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 193, it states unequivocally, the authority to define din belongs only to Allah. Exclusively, it's about clearing away the artificial stuff. Human-made rules, attempts to grab spiritual authority where it doesn't belong. This ensures worship, service. It's all directed just to Allah. No fear, no coercion.
Yeah.
It pushes back against any human trying to take over that divine role of setting the standards for a righteous life. The Creator sets the standards, not human whims or traditions.
And that leads right into another really powerful point. If din is about submitting to Allah's authority, how is that submission supposed to happen? Professor Dashan highlights that key principle. There is no compulsion in din de zerlama yokter from Al-Baqarah 256, right?
Yes, that verse is absolutely foundational. According to the source, it means din covering faith, morals, how we live. It has to come from conviction. The core is obedience and service to Allah, with tawhid as the unshakable system. But true submission, it comes from the heart, from the mind. You can't force it on someone. It's about consciously choosing to reject takhut, those false authorities, idols, anything that pulls you away from Allah, and choosing submission to Him alone. This links right into Hudala, God's guidance.
Yeah.
Din is the system built on that guidance, perfected by it, like it says in Al-Imran 72-74. And the beauty is the guidance lights the path, but you still have the choice to walk it. That's what makes it truly freeing, not forced.
This contrast you mentioned between Allah's freeing din and the human-made versions, that seems really important. How does Professor Dozan spell out that difference?
He draws a very sharp line. Allah's din is described consistently as easy, liberating. Mostly permissible, actually, with just a few specific things forbidden. Think about Surah Al-Ma'idah, verses 3-4. The source calls the Quran a freedom manifesto there, saying, all good things of life are made lawful for you.
A freedom manifesto, I like that.
Yeah. And the things that are forbidden, they're primarily to protect us, our health, our dignity. Things like avoiding carrion, intoxicants, idolatry. The source really stresses that in Allah's din, the default setting is permissibility, freedom. The few prohibitions are like necessary guardrails, not prison bars.
So the Quranic din is mostly saying yes to the good things in life with just a few essential no's for our own protection.
Precisely. And those yeses, they cover this huge space for living, innovating, appreciating beauty, building things, connecting, learning. The no's are very few, protecting basics like human well-being and dignity. But then you get the fabricated dins, the ones based on human desires, traditions, superstitions. They tend to flip that script completely.
How so?
They become rigid, fear-based,
Yeah.
filled with prohibitions, making life seem difficult, joyless. Imagine you're building something amazing. Allah's din gives you wide freedom to design and build with just a few core structural rules for safety. Fabricated dins, though, they might try to dictate the color of every brick, the exact angle of every joint, stifling creativity, making it all exhausting.
That's a great image.
And Surah Al-Ma'idah, verses 51-58, even warns that taking leaders from outside Allah's path is straying from din, because those alliances can compromise the core principles, divide the community.
And that verse in Surah Al-An'am 70-72 about people taking play and entertainment as their din, that really hits home, like making a religion out of distractions, prioritizing fleeting things over a real connection.
It really does. And it connects directly to what Surah Al-Imran, verse 23, says about false beliefs leading to a betrayal of din. When people turn away from Allah's book, following their own whims or invented ideas instead, they're essentially creating their own little religion, where satisfying immediate desires replaces that deeper spiritual alignment. They've strayed from the pure din.
Okay, so din is clearly central, but the source also shows it's not isolated, right? It's deeply connected with other key Quranic ideas like salat and taqwa.
Yes, exactly. The source really highlights the incredible consistency within the Quran's language. Din often pops up synonymously or very closely linked with salat and taqwa. They're not separate boxes. They're part of this coherent, interwoven system that shows just how holistic din really is.
Now, salat. Most people think of ritual prayer. Does Professor Dodon push beyond that standard translation?
Yes, significantly. In places like Surah Al-Ma'idah 57:58 and Al-Hajj 77:78, salat is actually equated with upholding the din or upholding tawheed.
Upholding the din, so not just the prayer itself.
Right. When the Quran says uphold salat, it's not solely about the mat and the timings, though those are part of it. It's about actively participating in the struggle to establish Allah's din in society. That means upholding justice, standing for truth, actively working towards a society where Allah's principles of fairness, compassion, mercy, where those things actually thrive.
Wow.
It's about being an agent for positive change. So it totally transforms salat from just a personal act into this wider societal mission.
That is a profound shift. It's aligning our actions with this whole framework, impacting everything. And you mentioned the source even looks at that tricky verse in Surah Al-Anfal, verse 35, about the salat of the polytheists. It clarifies that wasn't ritual prayer. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. This is really key to avoid misunderstandings. The source argues that in Al-Anfal 35, their salat wasn't prayer. It was their acts of protest against the Prophet establishing din. Things like whistling and clapping disruptively around the Kaaba. So understanding this shows salat in its dynamic sense active engagement regarding Allah's system, not just a static ritual.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about taqwa? How does that fit into this bigger picture of din?
Yep. Well, Surah An-Nahl, verses 48-52, the source points out a strong din taqwa identity. Taqwa is described as that deep consciousness of your responsibility to Allah. Reverence, constant awareness of Him. Look at the universe, the stars, the creatures, they all submit to Allah's laws naturally, right?
Right.
Humans are called to consciously emulate that submission. So din and taqwa become almost interchangeable. Both point to living with this conscious, reverent alignment with divine principles. It shapes your inner world, your outer actions, living with integrity, purpose.
It's clear this authentic din is meant to be liberating, holistic. But what are the consequences then when people stray from this path? The source sounds pretty strong about the dangers, especially when people ignore the Quran's pure message.
It does, yes. It describes the consequences of creating what it terms parallel books and parallel religions as, frankly, catastrophic. Surah Al-An'am, verse 159, directly warns against those who fracture the unity of their din, breaking off into sects and groups. This is called a bad deed, a siyi. It's seen as deeply destructive, undermining unity of belief, undermining our collective purpose.
And the source sees this pattern repeating, tracing it back to earlier communities like the Jews and Christians.
Exactly. It's not presented as a new problem. Surah At-Tawbah, verses 30-35, critiques earlier communities, like the Jews elevating the Talmud, or Christians whose later Gospels overshadowed the original Injil. They introduced human texts and interpretations that, according to the source, fundamentally warped the divine message. And it warns against the same happening within the Muslim Ummah, the global community. Things like collections of hadith potentially overshadowing the Quran's authority, or mystical writings. The source mentions things like Miznevi, Razainur, Fusul Hikam, that might claim a kind of divine inspiration or try to supplement the Quran. When people turn from Allah's clear, single message in the Quran to follow human interpretations, whether old traditions or new insights, the source argues it inevitably leads to division, confusion.
The source uses that striking phrase, attempts to extinguish Allah's light with their mouths. That's powerful imagery.
It really is. It's a metaphor for trying to dilute or obscure that clear, liberating message of Tawhid with human-made complexities, dogmas, superstitions. But the Quran insists Allah won't let His light be put out. His din will ultimately shine through and prevail over all these distorted understandings, no matter how many parallel religions try to cloud the issue. The truth has a way of enduring.
This whole deep dive has really broadened my understanding of din. It's not just a narrow religious category, it's this whole living system. How does the source kind of tie all these threads together? Does it present din as this comprehensive knowledge?
Yes, absolutely. Surah At-Tawbah, verses 119-122, presents din exactly like that. Comprehensive knowledge. It covers material life, spiritual life, legal matters, social structures, even politics. That call, "Vietefekkahu for Din," to gain deep understanding in Din, it isn't just about theology books. It's a call for intellectual engagement across all these fields.
All of them.
Yes, to illuminate society, to build a system of values that genuinely protects humanity. So, for example, materially, Din informs ethical business. Spiritually, it's about inner peace. Legally, it guides justice. Socially, it builds community. Politically, it demands accountability. The Quran doesn't see material and non-material life as separate or conflicting. They're two sides of one reality, and Din illuminates both. It's an invitation to think deeply, to really understand.
So it's not just about belief. It's about how to live, how to organize society, how to build something just and good. That truly makes it a guide for everything.
Exactly. And grasping that comprehensive nature is key because it shows every part of our lives, personal ethics, societal structures, can and should be brought into harmony under this umbrella of Din.
And circling back, as the source emphasizes from Surah Yunus 101, 109, all these roads within Din, they all lead back to Tawhid, right? It's like the central power station for the whole city of Din.
That's the perfect analogy. If you try to bypass Tawhid, the whole system loses its power, its light. It underscores just how absolutely essential it is.
Wow. What a journey into the heart of Din that was. We've really seen how Professor Doson's work pushes us, urges us, to maybe shed some of those layers of interpretation built up over centuries, and to get back to the Quran's direct, liberating message. Din, in its pure form, is Tawhid, complete, sincere submission to Allah alone, covering faith, ethics, social order, knowledge, everything. A path that's meant to be easy, progressive, truly freeing.
And it really hammers home that the Quran is the sole authority for understanding this Din. Free from human distortions, those parallel texts, superstitious add-ons. It's a call for critical thinking, deep intellectual engagement with the divine message itself, rejecting attempts to overcomplicate what Allah made simple and clear.
This really reframes things, doesn't it? Our personal relationship with faith, our role in society, moving from just passive receivers to active participants in upholding something just and harmonious. It reminds us our Din should actually simplify our lives, not make them more complex, make things easier, not harder.
And that's a crucial takeaway. Allah's Din is explicitly free from haraj. That means difficulty, hardship. It's free from confusing dogma, pointless rituals, self-punishing practices. It's a Din designed to fit perfectly with our human nature, to help us grow, to promote ease, not burden. It's a path for human flourishing.
So maybe we can leave you, the listener, with this thought. If Din is meant to be this safe haven, like Noah's Ark, as the source suggests, are there interpretations you might be holding on to that are actually like extra baggage, weighing the ark down? Or maybe even drifting you towards a shore that isn't the one intended? What stands out to you from today's deep dive? How might you re-examine your own understanding of this incredibly profound concept? Thank you for diving deep with us today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.